Thank you everybody for joining us today for Project Management Lite course. This is session number 1 of 3, hosted by Southern District ITE. My name is France Campbell. I definitely appreciate all you joining. I'm just looking to see right now how many participants we have. So definitely thank you all for joining. So here at my company, AECOM, we like to start off all meetings with a safety moment. And just kind of thinking through where we are right now. I know here in the Southeast, the temperatures have dropped a little bit and we are definitely feeling a little bit more of the coolness. So I just kind of wanted to warn everybody that as we are approaching winter time, it's time to probably go ahead and get your heat units serviced at your houses or townhomes or condos, wherever you may live. Also a good time to have your fireplace swept if you do have a wood burning fireplace. Also probably good to go ahead and start putting your ice scraper in your car for those occasions that we do need them here in the South. And then also a good time to go ahead and change out your smoke alarm batteries, or carbon monoxide batteries, whichever is applicable for you. So just kind of wanted to give everybody a warning that we are kind of getting close to winter. So first off, we're going to start off a little introduction for this course and for the project management training. So this project management Lite course is the product of several years of development by the Southern District ITE Workforce Development Committee. As I said, this training actually took about 2 years to develop, and a lot of that was because of COVID kind of slowing us down, everybody with multiple priorities. But it entailed over 15 volunteers from 7 out of the 8 sections in our district of Southern District ITE. So I want to thank everyone that was involved in this. Definitely was a group effort. And as you see here, basically involved all the sections except for Kentucky. So if anybody on the call happens to be from the state of Kentucky, feel free to volunteer to be involved if you would like to be. We definitely need more folks involved. All right, so a little bit about myself. As I said earlier, my name is France Campbell. I work for AECOM in Raleigh, North Carolina. I am the North Carolina Transportation Operations Manager, and I'm also the North Carolina Traffic and ITS Department Manager. I graduated from Clemson University, and currently I am the Southern District ITE Workforce Development Committee Chair. And one of the things I'll say about my day-to-day job is as the Transportation Operations Manager, I act as a project director or project approver, providing oversight for around 25 or so project managers and over 130 projects. So I definitely believe and can see the value of good project management on a daily basis. So this is something I definitely strive for and see that and have a passion for. Co-presenting with me today is Joe Gillis. He works for GDOT and AECOM. He's an embedded employee with GDOT in Atlanta, Georgia. He's a senior pre-construction project manager. He graduated from Auburn University, and he is the Georgia ITE Technical Committee Chair. His chair actually hosted a Georgia ITE Technical Exchange last week with the Alabama section of ITE in Talladega. So Joe's definitely done a great job in that position. I've actually known Joe for a little over a decade. We had the opportunity to work together at the city of Sandy Springs back in Georgia. So I'm definitely excited to have him on the call today helping me. So as I said earlier, you know, this training was created by Southern District ITE, and it was basically created because Southern District ITE members had indicated in several member surveys that there was a desire for some type of official training in project management, and many of them being in the public sector. They felt like there was a lack of training from their employer. So listed on the screen are just a few of the benefits of project management. And I'll definitely say that poor project management can have an inverse effect on these. So a little bit about those. Some of the benefits include, it can improve productivity and efficiency. Good project management also reduces cost and workload. It improves collaboration, and I like to think of this as collaboration between your team and also collaboration with your client or management, depending on which sector you're in. It improves client management satisfaction, client or management satisfaction. It improves focus and prevents confusion. We'll get into a little bit later about the project plan on some of the previous, some of the future sessions. And I also think it helps with conflict and problem resolution. A lot of things with project management has to deal with looking for sometimes like looking for risk and trying to see where there's potential weaknesses. And I believe a good project plan can definitely help you with that. All right, so just kind of dive in a little bit. Introduction is a little bit about scope creep and as far as the project management process. So scope creep is when there are changes in scope without any project procedures like change requests as shown here on the screen. And those can be without any adjustments to like the budget, the schedule, or resources. And most of us project managers in the private sector, like myself, are warned about scope creep regularly because of the impact it can have on our profits, our project schedules, and staff that are assigned to the projects. Most people are afraid of scope creep due to the impacts of budget or schedule alone. But I've learned throughout my career that one of the main reasons I always try to avoid scope creep, and sometimes a less thought of reason, is because the additional work is not included in the actual scope. And therefore, expectations on additional work has not been defined or agreed to, and may lead to expectations not being met by the client or management. I like to think that scopes it's a good way of getting everybody on the same page. And I think this good type of project management helps us to minimize and avoid risk as much as we can. And that's something I am definitely a strong believer in. But scope creep is not the only potential thing that can go wrong in a project. Here shown on the screen are some of the other ones. Sometimes that include changes in personnel. Say this is the project manager, or even say it's if you're working for a public entity, the mayor, city council, or department head. Failure to keep good records. Strong point of project management is keeping those records. Like say it's like meeting minutes or things, and having them very organized and accessible. Failure to anticipate what might happen. Again, part of any type of risk management or risk identification is looking for potential weaknesses and having alternative plans. Failure to communicate regularly with your team and stakeholders. That can definitely blow up in our faces, as we've seen sometimes if you get down the road too far with the project and you didn't do enough communication with your stakeholders, and all of a sudden they show up with pickets or anything. So, and then failure to follow the plan development process or project plan. These are definitely important. We'll talk about, as I said, in future sessions about the project plan. And looking back at some of these things on here as far as about the records or meeting minutes, I really want to say that I think a project manager, an important thing to do is keep good records and to communicate with the client team regularly, because I think it makes the project go a lot more smoothly. So a little bit about today's agenda. As I said earlier, this is session 1, and this is session 1 of 3 right now that we have currently slated. So this session will have a little bit of an introduction. I'll go through the project manager expectations, and then I'll hand it over to Joe Gillis to talk a little bit about the plan development process. Future sessions, session number 2, which will be we're thinking early November. We still need to nail down a date. We'll include the project management plan I've discussed a little bit, project scheduling, project financial plan, and leading the project plan. And then in mid to late November, we'll get into managing quality and risk, communication and time management, and then we'll have our project example number 1 to kind of everybody see like a hands-on approach of how project management can actually help with an example project. So right now, we have several sessions developed, and there are a few more in the hopper that we're working on. We actually, our committee right now is working on 2 of them, the first 2, and then we're slated to be working on the next 3 last. So those sessions include local administrator projects, picking your consultant, and I would like to say picking your consultant could be useful for both sides. Because I know here we probably have a nice mix of people on the call, public or private. Controlling the project, that's actually the day-to-day management of the project, getting out of trouble, and then working with stakeholders and elected officials. So with that, I'd like to do a quick little audience survey. So using the chat feature on Zoom, if everyone could kind of answer the question here on the screen, how many years of experience do you have? And this is just general, not with project management, but just in general, how many years of experience do you have? And when you do the chat, please make sure to send it to everyone so we can all see. I'm going to look up to my other screen in case you think I'm looking above my monitor. It's because I have another screen in front of me. Oh, nice. definitely have some folks on here with some nice range of experience. Yeah. Well, this is great to see. Thanks everybody for chipping in so quickly on the answers. I'm really glad to see that there's some folks that are you know, getting into their careers more, that also, you know, in the 20-year, even 30, several that are looking to get project management experience. I myself, I like to think that it's one of those things that I try to continue to improve on. It's something I still, even though I'm leading a class in it right now, I still see things in myself that I need to improve. And it's just, I think we always have to be constantly improving ourselves. I don't think anyone's perfect. So it's good to see people of all different ranges as I look through this. Wow, definitely some diverse experiences. That's awesome. Well, no, that's cool. So next we'll move into a little bit about project manager expectations. Once I get my screen back to progress. There we go. So some of the items we'll cover today in this first session, talk a little bit about the best PM you know, some of their traits, characteristics. I'll ask for everybody to kind of give feedback on that. Minimize this chat window. We'll talk about a strong project manager versus a project administrator. And then we'll go into some of the roles of a strong project manager. And then last, the impediments to effective project management. So using that chat feature again, next question. Think about one of the best project managers you know, and using the chat feature, please answer, go ahead and put in like one of the traits that you think make them such a great project manager. I'd like to see some of y'all's responses. Oh yeah, they're coming in now. Don't be shy. Bring these over to my other screen so I can actually read them without looking up. All right, so I'll start kind of going through some of them. We have organized, visionary. I like that. That encompasses a lot. Schedule management, leadership, organized, responsive, task-oriented. Good. Communication. They care about the growth of individual team members. That's a really good one. Not just about the project. I like that. Organized. Yep. Clear communication involves all team members. I agree. Detail-oriented with incredible patience. I definitely can see that one. Project management can test your patience. So no, thank you all for all that feedback. I definitely enjoy seeing that. So next we'll go through some of the traits that were defined by actually when Southern District was putting this together by one of the clients that they were working with, one of the project managers. So here you'll see on the just a few traits of some of the best project managers they've worked with. Number one, a good project manager follows through. And I like to think of that's on his or her own commitments, but also on others. It's good to make sure your team is kind of keeping up with things too, because it can't all just fall into one person. A good project manager needs to be a good listener. It's not just, you know, it's a two-way type of dialogue, transceiving and receiving. So it's got to be transmitting and receiving. It's got to be two-way. Can't just be one of the two. A good project manager has to be proactive, staying on top of things, not just in that reactive mode. A good project manager needs to be on top of every aspect of the job. As you get into project management, you'll learn that if there's one area of a project that you maybe are not on top of, then that will be the one that goes bad or goes sideways, as sometimes we say. A good project manager leads by example. Strongly believe in that. A good project manager needs to be a good communicator. That's really important with working with clients or management or stakeholders. A good project manager needs to back the decisions of team makers. I can't say that enough. You know, as someone was saying earlier about helping develop your team members, it's very important to think of your team, and it's you know, they're doing a lot of hard work and putting in a lot of hours. So it's very important that you have their backs and support them on things. And definitely, as several of you said, a good project manager needs to be organized. A good project manager needs to handle multiple priorities well. With most projects that are in our transportation world nowadays, there's not just one aspect going on, there's several. So you have internal pressures and external pressures that you have to prioritize. A good project manager definitely needs to be technically proficient, so they can work with those team members. Also, a good project manager needs to hold people accountable. I think that's definitely a good way to deliver a good product and also help people grow. And a good project manager needs to be able to delegate well. And going back to the technically proficient one, I think that one's important because sometimes a PM has to manage, sometimes disciplines outside of their technical expertise. And this is possible, but it just requires more coordination and effort from the PM. And I'd like to say a good example I have in my past of this type of work was when I was the project manager for the TMC redesign. I had experience with TMC layout, ITS, and that type of things, and even the project, the plan development process. But I had to oversee building architects, electricians, HVAC specialists, mechanical engineers, very much a lot of disciplines. And it definitely had the potential for things to go wrong, but luckily everything went really smooth. And I would say it just required me to kind of be a little bit more on top of things and a little bit more coordination on my end. So it definitely is possible, just requires more work. So now let's talk a little bit about what I had kind of alluded to earlier is the difference between a strong project manager and someone that's just kind of more or less a project administrator or a project coordinator, we call them in some areas. So the table on the screen covers some of those differences between the two. First off, a strong project manager is usually involved in the proposal effort, where a project administrator usually has little involvement in marketing. A strong project manager prepares the fee budget, where a project administrator doesn't really get much involved with the fee. And that also can get in the same with fee negotiation, where a project manager will actually be involved in the negotiation. That can be on the public or private side, where a project administrator just kind of works with the budget they're given. A strong project manager will participate in the team selection or interview on either side, and a project administrator not really much involved. I'd say a strong project manager is also, I would say, tasked with getting non-performers engaged or folks on the project that are poor performers. And next on the list, they control the technical direction. It's always important to kind of keep that technical eye and focus. A good project manager also controls the budget and schedule. And I think there the key word is controls, where a project administrator just kind of monitors the budget and schedule. A good project manager also needs to maintain a good rapport with the client. And that's a lot different than just reporting a status. Again, it's about that two-way communication. A strong project manager also directs fee collection efforts, and think of that as like invoicing or things like that, where a project administrator more or less just keeps kind of gets with accounting to handle that. And last is a good project manager is accountable for the success or failure, where a project administrator maybe just keeps a log of who is responsible. And on my next slide, I was wanting to kind of show you one thing that Joe and I talked about some before, looking at the project manager. I always picture the crown, and I like to think of the project manager as the king or queen of the project. And the project is their kingdom. So that doesn't mean that it's a dictatorship or anything like that. It's still, it's very important that they get feedback from others and everything, but they are the one that is pretty much at the helm of most of the responsibility for how that project goes. So some of the roles of a project manager can include the planning, and this kind of gets into the proposal efforts, putting together the fee, the scope, the schedule, maybe creating the project plan we'll get to a little bit later, organizing the project, and that's keeping up with the project files, keeping them organized, and that can be electronic or print. We're still in that age where most things are starting to go to electronic, but depending on what type of project you're working on, there might still be paper files required for certain types of audits. And that's also important for keeping up with the deliverables and the invoices and all those things. Directing, now this gets into like delegating tasks, kind of telling others, working with other staff about tasks, keeping everybody updated. And this can even be sometimes directing the client or management when feedback is needed, because again, it's two-way communication. Controlling, I like to think of this as like the day-to-day management of the project, like the budgets, staff resources, equipment needed, and all those kind of things. And last but not least, of course, is the technical. So this is making sure the technical aspects of the project are followed per the scope. Remember to think of that scope kind of as like your blueprint, and ensuring a quality control process is followed and documented. And this is those last words I said about quality control. That's something I think that's important for private or public sector, is making sure that things are checked and then back checked, and just trying to keep an eye on quality to ensure that everybody's getting the quality product. So of course, sometimes things don't go well, and sometimes human beings, when things don't go well, we like to create excuses. So these are some of the interesting excuses that we've kind of compiled for why for projects fail. Number one, the project team was full of incompetence. Maybe not so bluntly worded sometimes, but my response to that one is, remember, you're in control as a project manager of the project. If you have poor performers on your project, try to get them engaged or discuss it with management and look for alternative staff. Number two, I didn't have enough time. And I like to think of that as the project manager saying, I didn't have enough time to fully manage this project. Well, I believe that good project management requires dedication and proper time allocation from the project manager. Sometimes I've found in the past that when I have a project that is starting to get a little bit what I feel like out of control, it's because maybe I haven't dedicated enough time to it myself. And that's kind of my indicator, like, okay, this project needs some more of my time. Number three, so-and-so kept making changes. Well, changes are going to happen on projects, but it's important to document those changes and relay the impact of those changes with the client or management, whether it be the scope amendments or change orders or what. Not all changes necessarily require money or schedule changes. Number four, the budget was unrealistic. And again, I like to think of this as you are in control of the project. If there's some scope changes or any type of budget changes, you need to be on top of those and see if supplementals are needed to be pursued or what. Number five, I couldn't get enough help. We all know that sometimes our number one limited resource is people. So if you're in control of the project, you should also be in control of resources. So reach out to management if you need more staff. As a project manager, I always say, don't be afraid to reach out for help. Just because you're seen as the king or queen of a project doesn't mean that you don't have the ability to get help. Number six, let me put that window. I couldn't get enough information I needed from accounting. Haven't heard that one luckily too much, but I'll always say if you can't get enough information from your accounting, then maybe you need to try a different source or escalate the issue more to management. That's luckily not one I've seen very much. And last on this one is so-and-so was taken off the job at the worst possible time. Again, you're in control. And if you need to find someone else to do that, then that's something you need to jump on immediately. When there's changes in staff, or if there's changes in schedules, the quicker you can act, the better. And anticipating changes. Number nine, I wasn't given enough authority. I have heard this one a few times, but and I think that sometimes comes when someone from management is kind of overseeing the project manager and trying to assert a lot of their authority. And I'll say that when that does happen, it's important to kind of address it in the beginning as best as you can to work with that person. And if you don't have the authority, then sometimes it's even best to see if you maybe need to switch who the project manager is to someone that you feel is the one in authority. Number 10, the contractor didn't understand the job. Definitely heard this one, and it happens. And I'd say a lot of this goes back to coordinating heavily with the contractor and with management when needed, and documenting meetings and actions, and the best you can to document things. Number 11, this job was unique. Well, I'll say that most jobs are unique. It's very rare that we get cookie cutter projects are exactly the same. They're all going to have some unique aspect to them. So I would say a good project plan and oversight can overcome a lot of these challenges. I think at the beginning of the job, as much as you can kind of roadmap out with that project plan, the better. Number 12, the subs would not cooperate. I've definitely seen this one. This one kind of goes back to the contractor. You need to coordinate with them heavily, try to document some things and work with your management. Number 13, so-and-so quit and left me holding the bag, in lead. I think this goes along with kind of anticipating changes. and identifying alternate staff resources. A lot of times when looking at projects and you're setting up project plans, if you have certain staff that are identified as key or critical, and they're kind of so much like maybe say a lone resource or very mission critical, sometimes it's good to have identified an alternate resource in case, say they go out of town for 2 weeks and go on vacation. It's not always just the worst case scenario is if they quit or leave. So it's good to think about that. And last but not least, but number 14, so-and-so didn't know what they were doing. Well, I'll kind of go back to say, as the PM, you're in control of the project. And if someone doesn't know what they're doing, then you need to come coordinate with them and try to help get them up to speed, or to see if they possibly need to be swapped off the project. So next, I'll talk a little bit about some project manager duties. And again, I have on here the screen, that crown kind of represent, as we've been talking about, the king or queen of the project. So a primary duty for the project manager, as it says here, is represent your firm or agency in all communications from the initial effort all the way through the project closeout. Number 2, communicate with the client or your management on the project status and performance. Number 3, manage the project team. And last but not least, acting as the firm or agency representative, it's important that that deliverable that you're scoped to do, that you're managing, meets the quality, is on time, within an established budget. So those are kind of more or less those 4 kind of primary duties. So we dig into a little bit more now that we kind of covered some of those primary duties. Now let's dive in and discuss some of the more specific responsibilities associated with those primary duties. So number 1, kind of starting at the beginning of the project, is the project manager is usually the one responsible for defining the scope. They usually get into defining the schedule, and usually they're the ones, with the help from others, that develop the fee and hour estimate to complete the project and to go into negotiations. It's also up to the project manager to kind of educate themselves, I would say, and the team, to the terms. Think of that like contractor agreement. If say you're working with your client or working with with a sub, to keep everybody up to term with that contract and see what terms they're working with. Number 5, you have to attend the negotiation meetings. Usually a lot of projects, it's not just the fee that's submitted, there's usually negotiations. Processing invoices promptly. This is on both sides, following the terms of the contract and making sure invoices are sent or when they can. And I know sometimes as project managers, they can be afraid to invoice or something like that because of where things are. But what I've learned in my experience is your client, say the public entity, it helps them to kind of see where you are too for their own budgeting purposes. So the more regularly you invoice, of course, per the contract, the more everyone is kind of informed of things. Number 7, it's up to the project manager to schedule all project meetings. And it just doesn't stop at scheduling the meeting. You have to determine the agenda for the meetings. You actually put the schedule on everyone's calendar, finding a time that hopefully works for as many people as possible. You usually are the one that facilitates the meetings. And then one of the main things I always believe in is you're the one that prepares the meeting minutes and action items, even if you're not the one that's physically typing them up in the meeting, because usually it's hard to lead a meeting and take really good meeting notes or minutes. It's important that you make sure they get out in a timely and promptly manner and represent what was discussed at the meeting with action items. I know when I do my meeting minutes, a lot of times at the end, I'll either include the action items, or throughout the meeting minutes, I'll actually have them in red or a different color to kind of help them stand out a little bit more. It's also up to the project manager to document the changes in scope, personnel, schedule, and budget, as we talked about earlier, because those definitely have an impact, as we said, to the overall project success. And then it's up to the project manager to track the progress. And let's not think of that just as financial, but also in terms of schedule, and relay that information to the client and the team. So that's a little bit about some of the project manager duties. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Joe.
Unmute first of all. Let me share what I've got. I'm gonna use my version, I believe, right, France?
Yes, sir. You go ahead and transition to your PowerPoint.
Okay, I think that you need to stop your share, and then I can try to share. Okay. All right. Let's see. I think it's this. All right. I look right to everybody.
Yep, I can see it on my end, Joe.
All right. Okay, so I'll go ahead and start. So first of all, it's a pleasure to have worked with France on this little project. As he's alluded to, we've kind of been in parallel a lot of our careers over the last really about 13 years. We've been involved with Georgia section of ITE together, ITS Georgia, a couple of things. I worked with France at City of Sandy Springs. He was my manager there as part of AECOM, and we've been on this project, and then we've got another task we're doing right now for ITS Georgia, actually for the whole Southeast. So it's really been a good opportunity. It's also a pleasure to do something for the Southern District of ITE. I've always pretty much done stuff for just Georgia section, and so it's nice to broaden and do something that involves more states, and this is nice. Something project management related is also very interesting to me. I was not a project manager at the beginning. I guess nobody really starts off being a project manager, but I actually became a licensed PMP from the Project Management Institute in 2011, when I was past the halfway point of my career, actually. So I was later on becoming a project manager. I've been doing project management work since about 2007 for much of that time. And that project manager's been different types of project management. So that's something you'll see as a project manager. I've done projects that were ITS, some that were software implementations of both ITS and traffic signal software. And more recently, I've done more road projects from a project management perspective. But I found that a lot of the same tools and skill set are intertwined throughout all that. So I'm going to just take a few moments today to kind of go through the plan development process. And when I say I probably shouldn't say because let me go forward here. Different states have their own plan development processes. From our observation for developing this course, we learned that there's a lot of similarity. They're not identical. So we did not try to teach 8 or 9 different PDPs here. We took some and tried to pick out some of the commonalities between them. I will say that probably aligns more with what I'm familiar with in Georgia, maybe, than some of the others, but it should be pretty close, because project's a project, really, and everybody has to kind of work them similar ways. And what we're going to talk about first of all is that when you administer a federal aid project, you've got certain policies and state and federal laws you have to follow. Now, states tend to offer free or low-cost training on how to use their processes. There we go. I was looking for that little icon. Actually, United States Code says yes, you've got to do that. You have to administer federal aid projects in a certain way. So the PDP is a guideline, a standard that project managers need to be familiar with in order to execute projects in their states appropriately. So a little bit more, what is a PDP? And what you're going to see there, and if you think about what France talked about earlier, a lot of the same sorts of things that are just general project manager skills, they're built into the PDP, but it's a framework. There's a actual guidance, a document, whatever you want to call it, to help you get through that from point A to point Z. And what are some of the purposes of the PDP? You're going to help with communication. You want to make sure that all the sources are talking to one another. It gives you a way to help control scope, schedule, and budget. Remember, France said that project managers control, they don't just monitor. Another thing that PDP guides you in is making information available and documented as early as possible. It helps eliminate work duplication. It creates smooth transitions and seamless processes. If you didn't have a PDP, you might either do something more than once, you might do it in the wrong order, but this gives you a good process to follow to keep you come on the right path. And what does that do? It helps reduce your project development time. Project managers are able to make better decisions and have the best possible solutions for their projects. And when you're dealing with plans, one of the big goals is to have quality plans. And PDP has that goal of being able to create a good set of quality plans while minimizing costs and cost overruns. Here's a graphic bar from Georgia. PDP is really meant to be a linear process, and with a caveat I'll mention in a moment. Think about plan development process. You start from, you get the money. You got to figure out where that's going to come from. Even before that, somebody's got to have an idea of a project. Then you start going through the steps that you're familiar with if you're a project manager. You start with the concept. Once you get that concept approved, then you start working on preliminary design. And while you're doing that, you're starting your utility coordination and your environmental approvals. After you get preliminary design, you're at a step where you're ready to start getting your right-of-way plans complete as soon as possible, and you can do acquisitions. And while that's starting, you're getting everything else pulled together for your final design plans for a final review, with the ultimate goal of getting construction contract letting out. As you see here, mount letting. And we're going to go through these steps a little bit at a time through the rest of my part of the presentation. And just kind of another resummary of some project phases. There's multiple phases, but there's really three main ones that you want to remember. Preliminary engineering is really everything up through concept and about 30%, and that number can vary, about 30% of your plans. Really the point where you can get right-of-way plans done is what you're doing. Then you're in your right-of-way phase, and other things are going on, of course, while you're doing right-of-way, but once right-of-way starts, that's a big driver of what's going on, particularly on big projects. Then lastly, once you get everything finished on your design, you're ready to let, and then you're in the construction phase. So the PDP helps you get through each of these phases in the best way possible. So breaking these down just a little bit more, we'll start with project identification and programming. Now, depending on where the project is or the size of the project, it's going to be a little bit different. And you may want to ask yourself, who identifies projects for your DOT, and how does that happen? Well, for one thing, if you're in a city or a 50,000, or actually not just a city, but an MPO, metropolitan or area of 50,000 or more, it's a federal law that if you use federal funds, you have to get MPO approval for projects. Now, of course, you may not have federal money involved, but there's still things you have to do. You want to make sure you create partnerships between everybody that's involved, your DOT, your local government, transit, intermodal, FHWA, and of course, citizens that are part of the process. You may have a project that's in an urban, outside of an urban area, and there's certainly a process that every state and or maybe local government has for doing that. The big thing is there's got to be a process. You're not, as a project manager, having to just wing these projects. There's typically steps that help you get through the steps in the correct sequence and get things done correctly in the best way. So when does actual work begin? Well, one of the first things you have to do, and I don't know if this is a universal term, but it's a term I'm familiar with, it's a project being programmed. You want to have a project program before you start the engineering part of the project. Now, what does this involve? And this is essentially, you got to know how you're going to pay for this project, when you're going to do this project, and what are the agreements I need to do this project. Just the very basics. So now we start going through some of these additional steps. We start now with the concept phase. So what are some of the objectives of the concept? First of all, your project has a reason for existing. And that reason for existing is going to be in a stated need and purpose. Maybe use a different term, but that's generally what it is. And you want to be able to define what are the critical elements of that project. And you've done a very, how we call high level look at your alternatives and what effects they're going to have. Because the concept's going to get a little deeper into that, but you're going to have at least some idea of where you're going. So what are the 4 key ingredients? Planning, engineering, environmental, and public involvement. And you could argue maybe there's other things that are part of that, but these are at the maybe the top level, and the other things may be a sub level of one of these, but there's 4 key ingredients in a concept. And you want to, by the time you get done your concept, you want to have some idea of where you're going to go. And of course, through all this, you got to make sure you coordinate this between all the agencies, groups, basically your stakeholders. That's a term I haven't used in this talk, but everybody's a stakeholder. Everybody has a stake in what's going on. So they need to all be involved. And who's the coordinator of that? And that's the project manager. If you think about the point guard of the basketball team or the quarterback of the offense on a football team, that's the project manager is the one that's driving things. And of course, France did a good job really going into detail about the role of project manager. And here's one more graphic I took from Georgia DOT, and that's a concept development process. And your state may have something a little different, but it's probably close to this. If you think about what you're doing in a concept, first of all, you're getting all that information, lots of data. If you look on the left side of this, and I'll go into more details in future slides of what those are, but you're getting data about everything. You come together and bring everybody on your team, and you have that initial concept meeting. Then you, depending on the project, you may have a public meeting. Some smaller projects may not have them, but bigger ones generally do. And the ones that are federal funding, they do. Once you have your public information open house, you gather the comments from those who are participating in that, and you may go back and to make some tweaks. And you have a concept team meeting to talk about your concept. And the concept report is issued. VE study, you think of how dollars for those, really almost every concept report ends up going back over it and looking at budget, because particularly right now, everything's coming in high. I mean, any project manager will tell you everything is high right now, and everything's got to be scoped down. That's just what we're living in 2021. So you have that revision, then maybe you may have to go back and do another POH. I've got one project that's had 2 of those actually near Columbus, Georgia. But once you get that concept ready to go and for approval, and then you're ready to go into the next step. But not before I mention some critical considerations on your concept. You gotta make sure that you decisions you're making, they're sensitive to environmental issues. Make sure if HWA has been consulted, because get them involved early. Don't wait till last minute, because they're not going to care as much about your schedule as you are. They need lots of time, so you have to get them involved early on stuff. And also you need to know when they need to be involved in something. Think about the context. Where are you building this project? What are you doing? What kind of things can you do you need to think of when you're doing in context? We'll talk more about context later. We talked about need and purpose already. You got to keep looking at that and making sure, is my project still adhering to what was meant to be? So are we doing that like we should be? Do we have a good starting and stopping point for the project? Do we need to move it back one way or the other, or move it forward? And you also got to think about, there might be a lot of engineering needed, and if there's an option that needs less, I would think about it. the more things you can look into before you get into design, the better. Now, you're not going to necessarily design this during concept, but you need to be thinking about things. The more you can figure out early, the better you are. So let's talk about the environmental phase. And I'm not going to try to do a presentation on the environmental side of this, but just to give a very high level overview. You want to make sure that you provide enough information for the public and for officials to know that you've looked into how you're going to affect your environment. For federal funding, you have to do everything for that. For other kinds of projects, it varies. States may require you to do, a high percent of those items, but not everything. And when you're looking at the environment, you want to balance everything. You know that, I mean, you can't let it drive you to where you don't have a project, but you also can't just blow by environmental issues and ignore them. You got to address them and look and follow the right process to address them the right way. One thing that helps with that is the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. And I'm sorry, no expert on NEPA, but I've had to work with that on projects before. And there are lots of, and for federal action, you got to use everything on NEPA. But if you look kind of on the sideways under the umbrella, that's the rain. Yes, the umbrella is over the rain there. Air, noise, you got environmental justice, which of course is a lot of times going to be involved in your urban areas. You got to look at aesthetics, your handling of hazardous materials. What about your water resources? You're going to have buffers or not? Community resources. And then what are you going to do with areas that have important vegetation or fish and wildlife, and cultural resources? Those are all things that you can't ignore. You got to show that you've looked into those, you know where those things are, and you have a plan to mitigate and work around those best you can. And a little bit more specifics about that. On cultural, you're looking at things like historic and architectural resources. Make sure you got if you have one in your state historic preservation officer, again, make sure they're engaged in what you're doing. And we had I mentioned Native American tribes. I had a project down in Chris County, Georgia, where we had to make sure we had to notify 7 tribes of what we were doing on a piece of property and get their feedback. So you got to always just make sure everything that can happen, you got to make sure you address it in the proper way. Cemeteries, another thing you got to work with, because you want to avoid disturbing cemeteries if you can at all possible. You really want to try to avoid that. As for the natural environment, kind of mentioned a lot of this stuff already. You got your wetlands, your streams and buffers, and your open waters, and you got to know where you're going to put your buffers, and you got to know how many feet your buffer is for different types of water. You also got to know your protected species in the area of your project and make sure you're accounting for that. What's threatened and endangered? What about migratory birds or other types of animal life that might have to have a special protection? And there's a lot of agencies you got to think about: EPA, Corps of Engineers, Fish and Wildlife, maybe your state level environmental protection, just lots of different things. When we talk about social environment, you got a lot of things you got to think about. You got to think about your community. How are you impacting that community? Are you doing something that to people that you need to mitigate? You got to make sure you're not taking advantage of someone. You've also got to think about your resources, like your parks and other spaces that are used by the general public. And of course, air and noise. You got to always think about that, particularly air, particularly in the cities, noise near freeways. You also got to make sure you handle FHWA correctly, EPA review of air quality, and public input. You should have a balance of impacts on all these projects. You see, these are just a random project. There's about 4 or 5 different options you could take. Some of those are going to be more expensive, and some of those are going to have more environmental impacts, and some are going to be less and less. And they're probably not going to be the same. Your ones that's the least impact to the environment is probably not going to be the cheapest. So you've got to figure out what you need to do on that. It's going to be somewhere probably in the middle. And just a little bit of thought more about NEPA. You've got different kinds of NEPA documents. I'm not going to try to do NEPA training, but you got categorical exclusions, your environmental assessment. You want to get a FONSI. You want to get a finding of no significant impact. That's your goal. Like, yay, not causing any problems. But if you do, you got to do environmental impact statement, EIS. Replacement parcel 6Fs. If you can avoid that at all costs, do. Because I've got a project that it was already in process when I started. That 6F can really get bogged down. So if you can avoid a 6F, you avoid it. And just a final word about that, you have to, for federal projects, you have to get the approval of environmental before you get into right-of-way authorization, or you do your final design. Topic 4, preliminary engineering. This is at the point where you've gotten your concept approved, you've started your environmental, you're starting to think about right-of-way, but you haven't done plans yet. So you're working through all those different things, and you're going to get to about 30%. It might, the number may vary, but about a third of the way through, you want to stop. It's kind of like a hitting the pause button. I'm going to stop. We're going to take a look at where we're at. Are we going the right direction? Have we accomplished the goals of preliminary engineering? And here's some things you want to make sure you've done. You've looked at you make sure you followed Title 6 and DBE requirements. You need to look at utility and regular coordination. How have you engaged the public? And also, you got to look at the subsurface. You got to look at geotechnical, your walls. How about survey? How's that? By the way, survey, I'm going to make a point about survey, kind of an aside. Get that involved early as well, particularly right now. Survey is really getting behind on schedule just because of staffing. We mentioned that. And survey also, you got to make sure it's right. If it's wrong, it can cause a big delay as well. Stormwater management, as you all know, water is huge. How you deal with water, unless you're in Arizona or something, how you deal with rain is a big deal on any project. And that also goes into bridge and culvert design. Make sure you allocate plenty of time for bridge design. Eye test and signals, don't forget about that. And also don't forget about lighting, not just at roundabouts, but any other lighting, under bridge, wherever. And just some general project management guidance, kind of a little bit of a review, maybe what Francis talked about. Make sure you verify each task, factor in time for other parties to review. We got the PDP process here, but if you've got a consultant and they have a sub and they have a sub, you can't control more than about one step away. And so you've got to really make sure you kind of know that everything's being covered. So you got to add some contingency there. Start your difficult stuff early. And while you're doing all that, keep good notes, review them, hold regular meetings, engage everybody involved throughout. One last subtopic, final design. You're nearing the finish line here. You're pulling everything together from your design, your right-of-way, your environmental, your utility. You're having your final plan review, and you're just taking care of those last little things that you may have missed earlier, and you're straightening everything out. You're getting things ready to get construction plans. You're getting all your attachments put together, and you're getting ready to advertise. And you may be thinking about if you're going to do a construction engineering inspection, think about that as well. With your final deliverables, a set of construction plans with attachments, final bid documents, you're ready to advertise, you're ready to let, and you've arranged for CEI. And that is the end of the PDP section of the training. And the next one we're not doing today is project management plan, but that's where we're at next. I appreciate this opportunity to help present this today. I'll turn it back to you, France.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks for your covering that section on the PDP process. So as Joe said, this is our end of our session today. We didn't know how long it would go, so it's always good to give a little bit of time back, but I will allude a little bit to some of the next session, session number 2, which we're planning for early November, probably that first, second week in November. It will cover the project management plan, project scheduling, the project financial plan, and leading the project team. So be keeping an eye on a invite soon for an e-blast on that. And with that, I will go over to the Zoom chat, and I'd want to ask if anyone has any questions or anything they would like to pose to Joe or I. Or feel free to unmute yourself either way. All right, well, with that, I will think, and I also see that we have Cindy on the call. Thank you, Cindy, for joining us today, our Southern District ITE president. Definitely appreciate you joining us.
Thank you, France, for hosting the class today and getting us started on this project management Lite.
Yep, no, thank you for joining us. Well, if any of you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. My email is in the e-blast that first went out. So with that, I'll end it, and thank you again, everybody, for joining us.